Greetings to one and all. Super Wednesdays here in the Holy Apple, Holy Land. Winding down the first month of Adar. Tonight begins the new month of the second Adar, the month of Purim. We are at the 29th of Adar, first Adar, 5779. This class, of course, as always, is to try to improve ourselves, to try to come closer to God, to bring the divine presence out of the exile, and to wake up ourselves, first of all. And with that, also to, if you have a pen, crayon, or some kind of spray paint, take down these names. These were good people that were involved in a traffic accident last week. Ezra Binyamin ben Shulamit, Haim Itiel ben Ester Hadassa, and last but not least, Ester Hadassa bat Sarah. So if you take that down, pray for them. They were in a bad, heavy traffic accident about a week ago. Okay, today's title, today's subject. By the way, if you have any gloves on, just take those gloves off, because we're taking the gloves off, and this is going to be hard-hitting and a very important class with God's help. Subject today is Rabbi Benny Lau, racism and the Nuremberg laws. Okay, about maybe 2.5 weeks ago or so, there was a rabbi, a Jerusalem rabbi. He has a congregation somewhere in Jerusalem, and he got up to speak on Sabbath, and he had this to say. I'm quoting from the Channel 7 news in Israel, Arutz 7. Okay, let's see what he has to say. Rabbi Benny Lau, who serves as leader of Jerusalem's Ramban synagogue, not to be confused with the Ramban synagogue in the Old City, slammed the unification of the Jewish power group, the Jewish Home, and the National Union Party. Those three groups, Jewish Power, the Jewish Home, and the National Union group, the three parties unified into one group. Speaking to Channel 7 on Saturday night, Rabbi Lau said that a vote for the United Jewish Home Party is a vote for racism and the Nuremberg laws. I suggest the public examine the comparison which former member of Knesset, member of Parliament, Michael Eitan, made in the 80s between the Nuremberg laws and the laws which Rabbi Kahane, he doesn't say rabbi, but I'm adding that, wished to legislate, he said. And he goes on, as someone who dreams the dream of the resettling of Israel, I will fight so that Kahane's legacy, Rabbi Kahane's legacy, does not enter the Knesset, the parliament, because it is as racist a legacy as the Nuremberg laws. Last Wednesday, Rabbi Lau posted on Facebook, in the name of the love of Israel, in the name of protecting Israeli sovereignty. Oh, he's protecting our sovereignty. The Prime Minister chose to seduce the various sectors of Rabbi Cook's students to approve an abomination of a racist legacy, and to ensure it enters the gates of the Israel Knesset, Israel Parliament. Okay, that's what he had to say. Okay, once again, he did not use the term rabbi. We will not go down to his level, and we will he will be termed in this class Rabbi Benny Lau. Okay. Now, we have 3 statements I want to take time out and look closely, look into them. Okay, first statement he makes is he is, as someone who dreams the dream of the resettling of Israel. Number 2, seduced Rabbi Kook's students. The Jewish Power Party seduced, or the other parties were seduced by Rabbi Kahane's students, and they were succeeded to seduce the Rabbi Kook students. Number 3, he will continue his job, Rabbi Benny, in protecting Israel's sovereignty. Okay, protecting Israel's sovereignty. Okay, so let's take these points. Point number 1. He mentions that the students of Rabbi Kook were seduced, which is very interesting, because of the fact that when Rabbi Kahane ran for the elections in Israel, he received twice a letter of recommendation from Rabbi Kook himself. We're talking, of course, not of the father Abraham Isaac Kook, who passed away in the 30s. We're talking about his son, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who passed away right around the time that Israel gave up the Sinai desert to the Egyptians in the early 80s. So it's very interesting that these students were seduced when Rabbi Kook himself gave a letter of recommendation to Rabbi Kahane that his voice should be heard in the parliament, that he wants to protect and close the gates. That's very interesting piece for those that do not remember history and do not remember Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook. So today you can get up and make an ignoramus statement like that, and you can get away with it because nobody really remembers those pieces of information. So Rabbi Kook's students were not seduced at all. That's number 1. Second point that I wanted to stand upon is he's dreaming the dream of resettling Israel. Now, resettling Israel. Folks, take off those gloves or put on a few seat belts. We're going to discuss a very, very important issue here. He wants to resettle the land of Israel. Okay, resettle the land of Israel. To understand, who does the land of Israel belong to? Oh, you say, well, of course it belongs to the Jewish people, right? Didn't God give the land to the Jewish people? Well, yes, God did give the land to the Jewish people. However, if we look to the beginning of history, we will see a few amazing facts. And this lesson, which we will come out, hopefully after about 10 minutes, we will come out with a tremendous lesson of life, of understanding Judaism and Torah. So, let's take it from the beginning. We have the first verse of the Bible most people are familiar with. In the beginning, God created the earth, the world, etc. So we know that the first Rashi was the leading commentator on the Torah. He lived approximately 900 years ago. And he begins his commentary on the Torah with the following statement. He asks a great question. Actually, the history of the question we're not going to go into right now. Was he trying to honor his father? He mentions his father's name in his question. Whatever it might be. His question is the following. We know that the Torah is a book of commandments. 613 commandments of laws. Why in the world did the Torah bother us to start with the creation of the world? What was created on day 1, day 2, day 3? Let's get down to business. Getting down to business, folks, is the first commandment. The first commandment appears in the book of Exodus, in the portion of Bo. The first commandment that the Jewish people were commanded as a nation in the land of Egypt was, number 1, that the first month of the year for a Jew is the month of Nisan. Nisan begins the cycle of the months of the year, which means we're right now in the 12th month. Adar is the last month of the year, and Nisan begins the cycle once again anew. Second part of this commandment is that every month we have to sanctify the new moon. There's a certain prayer to say, a certain ceremony sanctifying the new moon. That is the first commandment to the Jewish people in the land of Egypt before the Exodus. So, if the Torah is a book of commandments, let's get down to the commandments. I don't need all these stories of a flood. I don't need all these wild stories. Interesting, but let's get down to business. So, the commentator Rashi tells us an amazing idea. He tells us the following, that if the nations of the world accuse the Jewish people of being robbers, that they robbed the 7 Canaanite nations of their home, tell them that I created, God is saying, if the nations of the world come and accuse the Jewish people, point the finger at you, you have stolen the land of the 7 Canaanite nations. Not one nation, not the Arabs. We're talking about, there were 7 nations that lived here, Canaanite nations. Knani, Chiti, Emori, Prizi, Yebusi, Girgashi. If somebody comes with pointing a finger at you that you are, God forbid, stealing someone's land, tell them that God created the entire universe and God decided to give the land to them, to the 7 nations. And then he decided to take it away from the 7 nations and give it to the Jewish people. So God, who created the world, who created morality and justice, he is able to decide who receives the land of the Canaanites, the land of Israel. Now, the verse that Rashi, the commentator, quotes is a verse located in Psalms 111:6. And it says there that with the power of God, I have given the Jewish people, through the power of God, I have given the Jewish people the inheritance of the nations. Whoa. I've given the Jews the inheritance of the nations. What nations are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about the 7 nations. So, this is very interesting. God gives us a land which is called, if you look in the Torah, it always says, interesting enough, the land of Canaan. Of course, Canaan was a son, one of the sons of was one of the grandsons of Noah, was the son of Haim. So why does the Torah not use the expression the land of Israel? It keeps on using the expression after we're here. For example, take a simple example. Moses is in the desert. He's sending the spies in order to check out what's the scene, what's the scenario in the land of Israel. What does he say? He says over and over again. Look at the beginning in the book of Numbers, in the portion of Shlach. He says, I am sending you to the land of Canaan. I'm sending you to the land of Canaan. He says that just in the first reading, the first portion. He has it twice. The language is, why don't you just use, it's the land of Israel, no? Why do we have to mention, it looks kind of suspicious perhaps, land of the Canaanites, like perhaps we stole it? I thought it was the land of Israel. I know myself, I never used the P word. You know, I'm not talking going to the bathroom, but there's a certain P word that I don't use, you know? And that's, we just call them Arabs. Because the P word is just not true. It's false. There are no P people, and there is no P nation, and there's no P state. So, what in the world is going on here? That in the Torah, in the Tanakh, we see this expression recycled over and over again, even after we're in the land of Israel. So the question is, folks, who was the land of Israel given to? Was it given to, at the beginning of time, was it given to the Jewish people? Or was it given to the Canaanite nations, children of Ham? There is a tremendous dispute on this point. There are many opinions on both sides. I'll just give a few examples. Rashi himself, in two of his commentaries, he brings both opinions. Amazing. In the book of Genesis 12:6, he says that Noah gave his son Shem. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefet. And he gave the land of Israel to the son, his son Shem. Now we know when you hear the word anti-Semites, in Hebrew it's anti-Shemim, people that are against Shem. We are children, the Jewish people stem from Noah's son Shem. We come from his 3rd son, Arpachshad. So according to this first Rashi commentary, the land of Israel was given to the descendants, to the Jewish people, via Noah, giving it over to his son Shem, and the Jewish people stemmed from Shem, so it was given to the Jewish people. However, Rashi, the same commentator, in the book of Numbers 13:22, in the portion of Shlach, he says the opposite, that this land over here in the Middle East, which up until today we were sure was called the land of Israel, now we're not so certain, it was given by Noah to his son Ham, and Ham had a son named Canaan. And then Canaan had children who became the 7 nations. So Rashi himself brings down 2 opinions. What's the bottom line? Not simple. Not a simple bottom line at all. According to the commentaries of Chizkuni, of the Tur, and of the Tosfot, they say the following. In reality, Noah gave most of the land that we call today Israel, It was given to Ham. It was given to Noah's son Ham, who later had a son named Canaan, who later gave birth to 6 other children. They became known as the famous 7 Canaanite nations that lived in the land of Israel. So most of the land was given by Noah to his son Ham, and then to the Canaanite nations. Only a small part, Jerusalem, was given over to his son Shem, to the Jewish people, but not the other parts. According to Rav Mizrahi and the Maharik, they disagree. They say all the land was given by Noah to his son Shem, which means that this land is the land of Israel because the Jewish people stem from the son Shem. Now, we should be waving our hands here, asking for a timeout on the court. Not a simple issue. Why? Because many of the commentators, like Nachalat Yaakov, he points out a great point. We know that according to Torah, according to the way that the Torah teaches us, we give the firstborn has priorities. So, the Jewish people, it is true we stem from the son Shem, but we come from his 3rd son. We do not come from his first son, which is Elam. And therefore, when commentators will say that the land was given over by Noah to his son Shem, this does not necessarily prove that this land belonged from the beginning to the Jewish people. This land belonged to the Jewish people. No, because we could say that his son Elam, which the Jewish people do not come from, he received the land of Israel. And therefore, we're out of a claim of the land of Israel. How long did the Canaanites, the 7 nations, how long did they live here? Amazing. At least 430 years. The Canaanite nations, 7 nations, lived here 430 years. Just to get, that's the smallest opinion, how long they lived here. There's other higher opinions, estimations, how long they were here. But the minimal, that they were here 430 years. They had children here. They had grandchildren here. They had great-great-grandchildren here. Great, put a few zeros over there. It's an amazing thing. And one day, Joshua sends these 3 telegrams. Hey, it's us, the Jewish people. It's us. We're coming in. And he gave them 3 possibilities. Not the point of our class right now. But imagine that you can understand that the 6 Canaanite nations, they say we ain't going anywhere. They weren't pulling out any red carpet here. They were saying it's time for fighting. It's time for fighting. We're not going anywhere. We were born here. You coming? You're stealing our land? We have children here. We have grandchildren here. We have great-grandchildren here. Look at the street names. Look at the street names. 430 years. Amazing. So, Rabbi Benny, he wants to resettle. He's resettling Israel, the land of Israel. Very interesting. Where is the land of Israel? Where was it taken from? Folks, an amazing question here that we must ask after this. We see that there's a dispute in the beginning. Who was the land of Israel given to? Was it given to Shem, or was it given to Ham? Now, this is a tremendous lesson. If God decided that the Torah would not begin with the first commandment. And the Torah is a book of commandments. But we're not going to start. Why not? Because here we have the foundation of Judaism. The foundation of the Torah. In this first verse, it's the entire ball game. If you understand this point, you got it. And if you don't understand this point, you're out of it. Why? The question we should all be asking. Why is it so complicated? Why did God, so to speak, get us into this mess? There is so much territory, empty territory. Okay, we're going back 4,000 years ago. Going back 5,000 years ago. Time of the flood. We're going back a long time here. What is the problem what is the problem if Columbus could discover America in 1492, if he could, it's 1492. So he had this whole vast area that he discovered. So what's going on over here? Why is it so complicated? We have a massive dispute here. Who does the land belong to? Does it belong to Shem, which means the Jewish people? Or does it belong to the sons, the children of Ham, the Canaanites? Why is the land continuously called the land of Canaan, the land of the Canaanites? Change the name. Even after we're in the land of Israel, we continuously call it the land of Canaan. Why is that? Why did God set it up in this way? So folks, it's an amazing concept. When we open up that first page of Torah, and this is the entire make it or break it of Judaism here. We have to understand when we open up that first verse, God did not make a mistake here. He could have given us a land that was empty, it was undisputed, no problem. And he brought us into this entire, cholt pot. It's so messy over here. So complicated. Even King David in his Psalms, which we said 111, he says, thank you, God. The power of God, he gave us the inheritance of the nations. Oh my God, that doesn't sound too good. We received somebody else's inheritance. When you open up that first page, it is coming to teach us the greatest lesson of life. What is our source of justice? What is our source of morality, of compassion, of righteousness, of truth? God comes and says, I gave this land to the nations of Canaan, the Canaanite nations. I gave it to them for a certain amount of time, till the time was right for the Jewish people. And then I removed them, we removed them, and we gave it to the Jewish people. Now, that might not sound to many liberals, that might not sound too cool. But the Torah, we are not the source of justice and truth. People, human beings, we are not the source. God is our source. And it works out the way that God wanted it. He wanted it to be so messy. He wanted to be so unclear. He wanted to keep the name of the land of the Canaanites. To remember always that when we come, we are not robbers. And it's because God told us to inherit this land. We are not robbers. It might look to the human eye, it might look like we're robbers. You tell them that the source of morality, the source of justice, the source of truth, of mercy, is not us, not human beings. It's God. And God said that this was the just and righteous and merciful and truthful thing to do. So that is a tremendous, that is why God did not start with the first commandment, because before we could go to commandments, we gotta get our compass in our mind. We have to get it straight. Where do we receive our green light? Who do we receive our green light from? Is it from our own thoughts, from our own understanding and feelings and emotions, or do we understand that God is our highest source? God is the source of all mercy. And if God tells us to remove these nations that have been living there for at least 430 years, that is the most merciful and just and truthful act that there can be in this world. And that's why it comes first, because this is the foundation. With it, we have it all. Without it, we have not entered the Torah at all. We're playing games. So, back to Rabbi Benny Lau. His dream of resettling Israel. We see here, resettling Israel, this part of the world, not a simple issue. We see, not a simple issue. So this part, according to majority of sources, this part of the land belonged to the Canaanite. It was given to them by Noah to the Canaanite nations. Not a simple issue. But not only that, talks about resettling the land of Israel. Now, we should all know that in 1948, in the War of Independence, while Rabbi Lau is his dream of dreams is resetting the land of Israel. So let me tell you something, Rabbi Benny, and let me tell you something, world. In 1948, 711,000 Arabs were removed from the land of Israel. So Rabbi Benny Lau could resettle. 711,000 were displaced. Some ran away and some were chased out. 700, you know 7-Eleven? So maybe this is where they get their name from, 7-Eleven. But this ain't no Slurpee. How exactly do we explain that one? How does Rabbi Benny Lau explain that we came and we took, in the time of Joshua, the land out of the Canaanite nations, the 6 nations? How did we do that? How did we resettle? They had lived here for 430 years. The dream of dreams, resettling the land. I love this honesty. Beautiful honesty. Okay, so another point. Rabbi Benny Lau, he will be protecting Israel's sovereignty. Protecting Israel's sovereignty. This is very interesting. He's going to defend Israel's sovereignty. Now, this chutzpah, imagine that. This Rabbi Benny Lau pointing a finger and at Rabbi Kahane and charging him as claiming that he's a racist and he's similar to the Nuremberg laws. It's very interesting. And on the other hand, we have Rabbi Benny Lau, who's telling us here, is quoted as saying he's protecting Israeli sovereignty. Now let's look at the Israeli sovereignty that he's protecting. How does he explain this one? How does he explain that in order to protect Israeli sovereignty, there's a law of return, that any Jew that comes to the land of Israel is granted automatic citizenship right away. Not so for non-Jews, in order to protect Israeli sovereignty. And you know what? In order to protect Israeli sovereignty, how does Rabbi Benny Lau get up there? And he sings the national anthem, talking about the soul of a Jew yearning to come back. To come back? Come back where? Oh, where the Arabs had once lived. How exactly does he get up and sing that national anthem, which could definitely offend the Arab population or the non-Jewish population in the land of Israel? So he's the big waver of Rabbi Kahane the racist, Rabbi Kahane with the Nuremberg laws. How exactly does he wave the flag of the law of return, which differentiates between a Jew and a non-Jew? How is he able to sing the national anthem which differentiates between the soul of a Jew yearning? If we open up the Declaration of Independence in 1948, we will see there that there has never been such a schizophrenic document in the world. You look at it, most of it's talking about the fact that Israel is by definition the Jewish state. How exactly is Jewish state and not other? How exactly does Rabbi Benny Lau swallow the Declaration of Independence? Of course, at the end, it talks about equal rights, etc. But of course, Rabbi Benny Lau, he's out there to save the Israeli sovereignty. So my question simple is, theoretically, but Rabbi Benny, if today or tomorrow, from 5 years or 10 years from now, if the Arabs become a majority in the parliament, or they become a majority in the country, and they decide democratically to change the name of Israel to the P word, okay, is that, how do you plan on protecting Israel, the Jewish sovereignty, if now they are the majority? How exactly are you going to do it without being boomeranged in your face? Well, this is racist, because if they have equal rights, then they have the right to become a majority and change the name of the definition and the name of Israel. So how exactly is he going to protect? He's the protector of the Israel's sovereignty. Last but not least, Rabbi Benny Lau accusing Rabbi Kahane of being a racist, of being somebody that's pushing the Nuremberg laws. Rabbi Benny, we're right now on the heels of a new month, the second Adar. We're 15 days away from the holiday of Purim. I want to ask you, right before the holiday of Purim, we bring out the Holy Torah, and there, the only time during the year, once a year, we have this ceremony. Only once a year is there a biblical commandment to read from the Torah. We read it every week. We read it 54 times during the year. That's rabbinical. But once a year, Rabbi Benny, we have a Torah commandment to read the Torah. What's so important about this one portion? You know which one it is? It's talking about the annihilation of the nation of Amalek. Now Rabbi Benny, pointing the finger at Rabbi Kahane, racist, Nuremberg laws. How exactly, Rabbi Benny, how would he exactly sell us this commandment? There is a positive commandment to wipe out every single person of the Amalek nation. That includes men, includes women, it includes children, and includes babies. What are they? Why are they guilty? What are they guilty of? Because of the fact that they had two parents and now I'm a little baby and I was born yesterday and the Jewish people are going to blow me away? What exactly? Can you explain me this law? Can you explain me this law? I don't have a problem of explaining it. But Rabbi Benny, according to you, and pointing the finger at Rabbi Kahane as being a racist against non-Jews or against the Arabs, how are we able to destroy and annihilate an entire nation? Babies, little babies, cutie, hoo-hoo, pitsy pitsy, hoo-hoo, poo-poo-poo-poo, little babies. Pure souls, maybe. How are we able to do that? In fact, when the Messiah comes, one of the 3 commandments that he has is to wipe out the nation of Amalek. Wipe out the nation of Amalek. So, before pointing fingers, Rabbi Benny, at others, Rabbi Kahane, followers, students, it's good to look in the mirror. It's good to look in the mirror and think about these subjects that we've mentioned today. The land of the Canaanites, 7 nations, 430 years, the law of return, the declaration of Israel's independence, the national anthem of Israel, the holidays of Israel. Think about it. Look in the mirror before you open up your mouth towards others. Okay. Okay, moving right along. As I said, we're taking off the gloves today. And don't put them back on, because we're only starting here. It's only the beginning. It's probably will take 2 classes here to, to finish all the rounds here, till we get to the TKO here. Okay. Before we get to the Nuremberg laws, most people like to throw out the term Nuremberg laws. And when it comes to Rabbi Kahane, accuse him of being a copycat of the Nuremberg laws. Most people have never read the Nuremberg laws. So folks, before we get to the language of the Nuremberg laws, let's give a little bit of a background on what was happening in Germany in the 1800s and in the 1900s. Let's discuss this. It's very, very important here. Okay, we're reading from a lot of different sources. Anybody interested in where I'm coming from? Nothing is my own, of course. It's all from history books, etc. Here we go. We're going to start. The backdrop to the movement's emergence was the emancipation. The process began in late 18th century to grant European Jews equal rights and eliminate the legal barriers that had impeded their social and economic progress for centuries. The emergence from the European ghetto had an enormous impact on the practice of Judaism. We're talking about the emancipation, we're talking about equal rights. Hey, please let the good times roll, yeah? Let the good times roll. There was a tremendous price tag that Judaism paid for this. Eager to participate and demonstrate to their neighbors what loyal and productive citizens they could be, many Jews decided to jettison kashrut. They got rid of kashrut, Jewish dietary laws, and other traditional laws and practices which prohibited them from eating at the homes of their non-Jewish friends or attending social gatherings at cafes. The Reform Rabbi Lawrence Englander had written in an essay on the movement's origins. They were embarrassed too, should neighbors accustomed to the decorum of the Protestant or Catholic Church visit a synagogue and witness a spectacle of men wrapped in strange prayer shawls, noisily praying, while children tore up and down the aisles. The early Jewish reformers sought to fashion a Judaism more similar with European life. Rabbis led services in black clerical robes similar to those worn by Christian clergy, and employed professional choirs and organ players. Men and women sat together rather than in the traditional synagogue where there was separate seating. Male worshippers prayed bareheaded without the traditional head covering. For a time, the main Sabbath service was conducted in German rather than in Hebrew. The services were held on Friday night or Sunday, so not to interfere with activities on Saturday, which was generally a work day. The two-day weekend wasn't introduced until the early 20th century. And the vast body of ritual practices that had served to set Jews apart from the wider culture was de-emphasized in favor of universal ethics and the prophetic vision of justice and peace. By the year 1810, 10% of Berlin Jews had already converted to Christianity. Amazing. 1810, talking about 120 years plus before the Holocaust. The assimilation, converting, the wheels were already rolling. The first permanent Reformed temple was founded in 1818 in Hamburg, Germany. Early Reform leaders preferred to call their house of worship temples rather than synagogues. Why is that? Temple? I thought the temple stood in Jerusalem. You know, the Temple Mount, yeah? Partly to distinguish them from traditional synagogues, and partly to signify that they had abandoned the Jewish longing to rebuild the ancient temple in Jerusalem. Amazing. Next time you step into a temple, this is instead of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem. We no longer have a dream. We no longer have a desire for the temple in Jerusalem. We found our Reform temples here in Germany. The leading Reform pushers in America, of course, were all from Germany. Jewish Enlightenment. It is no coincidence that Germany was the birthplace of Reform Judaism. Progressive thinkers sought to transform Judaism from within when they could not stem prejudice against Jews from without. Moses Mendelssohn pioneered the Jewish Enlightenment or Haskalah movement, which advocated ideas of equal rights and freedom. Mendelssohn openly discussed the ways that Jews could live in a multi-religious society. Adopt the mores and the constitution of the country in which you find yourself, he wrote, but be steadfast in upholding the religion of your fathers too. What a joke, because years later there was no more Moses Mendelssohn. His family had converted to Christianity. Adopt the mores and constitution of the country. You be like the country you're in. In subsequent generations, many Jews, among them Karl Marx, his parents, found it easier simply to convert to Christianity and live publicly as Christians in order to access jobs, property, and other basic rights. But there was another answer to the paradox posed by modernity. Inspired by Mendelssohn, these reformers believed that their mission was to bring Judaism in line with modern thought. They also promoted the idea that prayer should be chanted in the local language rather than in Hebrew. They encouraged rabbis to look beyond the Talmud and the Torah for guidance. Reformers spurned the idea that the past could dictate a way of life, in an increasing, could not dictate a way of life in an increasingly secular and industrial context. They modeled many of their religious practices after German Christians, in introducing music similar to that heard in churches. And many wanted to change the Sabbath to Sunday. They wanted to remain Jews while highlighting Judaism's similarities with Christianity. Enlightenment ideas began to influence many intellectuals, and the resulting political, economic, and social changes were overpowering. Many Jews felt a tension between Jewish tradition and the way they were now living their lives, resulting in less tradition. Reform Judaism was the first modern response to the Jews' emancipation. Circumcision was abandoned. Rabbis wore vests similar to those of Protestant ministers. The traditional Hebrew prayer book was replaced by a German text. We go further. Between the years 1871 and 1909, more than 15,000 Jews converted just in this 38-year period. Over 15,000 Jews converted to Christianity in Germany. An amazing thing. We had 1810 was our first 10%. Amazing thing. 15,000 plus. So we have, folks, in Germany. Germany was the center, was the foundation of reform and conservative. In fact, an amazing statistic. When the Germans had their Kristallnacht, when they destroyed temples, synagogues, most people don't know that they were almost all reform, because in Germany there were less than 2% religious Jews in Germany. So the temples and the synagogues that were getting hit were the temples of the Reform and Conservative on that Kristallnacht, where the breaking of the glass. So we have tremendous assimilation that's happening here within the Jewish people. Not only that, we have emancipation. The Gentiles are giving the Jewish people tremendous freedoms, equality. Where does that lead us to? Listen to this. Germany, 1919 to 1933, under the Weimar Republic, German Jews played a major role in politics and diplomacy for the first time in their history. And they strengthened their position in financial, economic and cultural affairs. Listen to some of these Jews that were heads. Hugo Prube was the interior minister under the first post-imperial regime and wrote the first draft of the liberal Weimar Constitution. Another Jew, Walter Rathenau, the chairman of General Electric, AEG, and head of the German Democratic Party, served as foreign minister in the year 1922. Already by 1914, Jews were well represented among the wealthy, including 24% of the richest men. 24% of the richest men in Prussia were Jews. 8% of all university students in 1914 were Jews. Author J. Howard Geller says 4 possible responses were available to the German Jewish community. The majority of German Jews were only nominally religious, as we discussed, and they saw their Jewish identity as only one of several identities. They opted not for Judaism, they opted for liberalism and assimilation into all phases of the German culture. A second group, especially recent migrants from Eastern Europe, embraced Judaism and Zionism. A third group of left-wing elements endorsed the universalism of Marxism, which downplayed Judaism and ethnicity. A fourth group of Jews decided to embrace hardcore German nationalism and minimizing or hiding totally their Jewish identity. Folks, a tremendous price tag. When the Jewish people, there are a lot of good points when Jewish people receive more rights. There are many good points to that. It could be used positively. However, in this case, in our case, in most cases, when the Jewish people receive equality, equal rights, that spells the end of Judaism. That spells assimilation. Look in Europe, look in America, look at the assimilation rate. Amazing. The destruction of Judaism. That is why the saintly Chabad Rebbe was against in the revolution, Napoleon Revolution. He was against Napoleon. Why? Because he understood that Napoleon stood for equal rights and for freedoms and emancipation, enlightenment. And he knew that that would be the death warrant for Judaism. So therefore, he did not support the efforts of Napoleon. Listen to more statistics. German Jews were almost entirely emancipated during the period of the Weimar Republic, 1918. All previous restrictions that had existed on Jews were annulled, and Jews took part in all aspects of public life. They began to make their way into many government-run organizations, universities, the legal system, public services. Jews also became prominent in literature and the arts, philosophy and science. The numbers among German recipients of the Nobel Prize was far beyond their proportion in the population, which was less than 0.75%, according to a June 1933 census. There were Jews who had served in the army. 100,000 Jews volunteered into the army during the First World War. 12,000 Jews died in the First World War. Amazing. 12,000 Jews fell for who? For Germany. What in the hell are Jews doing in foreign armies? What are they doing fighting for foreign countries? Folks, in fact, not very well known. But during World War I, there were 1.5 million Jews killed in battle in World War I. We're talking about soldiers. This was the largest Jew versus Jew war ever. I mean, this is amazing. Jews are fighting at all different fronts. German front, the Russian front. One against another. 1.5 million Jews murdered in these wars. Jews fighting Jews. We're going to show you that we're more German than the Germans. The law itself. So folks, we have a 1-2 knockout punch here. On the one hand, as we said, as the historian said, from within, the Reform and the conservative movement, hacking away at Judaism, turning into Christianity, turning into a mockery, assimilating. Jews, as a response, converting to Christianity. Tens of thousands of Jews converting over to Christianity. And on the other hand, the second punch, that was the left punch. The right hand punch. The Jewish people received tremendous freedoms in Germany. And they used this to get involved, to get in the face of the country Germany. Now, we spoke about this once in a class. It's an amazing point over here. If you look at a lot of the literature, what was bothering Germans, what was really bothering the Germans, was the fact that the Jews were in the face of the Germans. They were getting involved in the government. And they were telling the Germans what to do. We're going to decide. Today it's similar. There's a lot of Americans out there. There's a lot of proud Americans out there. And they look out and they see all these Jewish names that are involved in destroying the history and the tradition and the culture of America. These Jews are going to come into America and tell us how to run our lives and what to think, what's proper and not. What kind of chutzpah is that? That is really what was happening over here. What was bothering them, it wasn't those guys with the side curls. It wasn't the dudes with the beards. It wasn't the women with the hair covered. They were not bothering them. Wagner himself, Yimach Shemo, may his name be erased. He himself said, I hate the religious Jews, but I despise. And he called them a fifth column. Those that think that they could put on costumes. They could put on German costumes and think that they could integrate, they could assimilate into our society and tell us right from wrong. Those I despise. Those are a fifth column. They were the enemy number one, not the religious community. The religious community was an extra bone for them, was dessert. But that wasn't what was bothering them. So we have a double-edged sword over here. We have the reforming conservative movements assimilating, and we have all these freedoms, and we're using them to disappear and to leave the Torah and leave God. So let's look into the law. What is the Nuremberg Law? Nuremberg Law was set up September 15, 1935. Special meeting convened during the annual Nuremberg rally of the Nazi Party, the NSDAP. There were two basic laws. One was the protection of German blood, and the second one was German honor. Now listen to these laws. They are thrown out by many against Rabbi Kahane. But listen to these laws. Number one, it was forbidden to marry Jews. Forbidden to marry Jews. Who was this law against? When they thought up of this law, the Germans, who was it targeting? Was it targeting those religious Jews with the black hats and the black coats? And the women with the hair cover? And the strings hanging out? That's who they were worried about? Were marrying? That's not who they were worried about at all. According to according to German historians, there were 750,000 Jews that their grandparents already had assimilated by the time of this law. By the time of the Nuremberg laws in 1935, September 15th, according to the German historians, there were 750,000 Jews that already the grandparents already had assimilated and were already out of Judaism. This was ironic. This Nuremberg law classified Jews as someone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents. Therefore, the Nazis classified tens of thousands of Jews that were Christians, that were priests, that were nuns as Jews, only because their grandfather happened to be Jewish. It's wild. 750,000. That's who the law is against. The uprising of the Germans. They were frightened. The way of life, their culture. They saw the Jews as troublemakers. They saw the Jews, what they did in Russia. Russian army. Who set that up? Who set up communism? They saw the Jews as the rabble rousers. The ones that would bring a revolt and an end to the German culture. They saw them as a threat. The ones that had gotten into all the public life, into the music, and into the theater and the culture. Back to the law. Forbidden to marry Jews. Next, extramarital intercourse between Jews and Germans was forbidden. Last but not least, second to last but not least, Jews were not allowed to employ female Germans under the age of 45 in their homes. And last but not least, Jews were not allowed to fly the Aryan flag. Now, which Jews were flying the German flag? Like, was it these black hat dudes? Was it the covered hair women? They weren't flying any German flags. Think about what's going on over here. What was bothering them? What thorn was in their side? It was the reform, the conservative who destroyed Judaism, destroyed Torah, destroyed belief in God. Amazing thing. You listen to those laws and you say, time out. What the hell is going on here? Those laws sound familiar, Brother Len. I've heard those laws somewhere. That Jews are not allowed to marry Gentiles? Didn't I hear that somewhere? 1 second. Having relations with non-Jews? Sexual relations? Against the law? I've heard that somewhere also. Not to be alone? Not to be in your house with German housekeepers? Sounds familiar somewhere. I've heard that somewhere. Folks, an amazing concept here. Do we understand what's flying here? The Jewish people, we were commanded by God to keep the 613 commandments. If we do not fulfill the commandments, observe the commandments, then God has an interesting way of turning the tables around. Eventually, we will observe those laws, but instead of it becoming our free will, becoming our free choice, that we decide that we want to remain Jews. We want our children to be Jewish. We're proud Jews. We will remain Jews. We will remain loyal to the Torah. Instead of us deciding, then the Gentiles will make a code of law against us, which basically is the same idea that the Torah, but now it's them, and now it's ugly. That is exactly what happened. The Jews assimilated. They were intermarried. In fact, listen to this. The Nuremberg laws had a crippling economic and social impact on the Jewish community. Persons convicted of violating the marriage laws were imprisoned. And upon completing their sentences, were rearrested by the Gestapo and sent to Nazi concentration camps. Those that married. Non-Jews gradually stopped socializing with Jews. Do we understand? Open your ears. Open our eyes here. Hashem is just turning the tables on us. What should have come from us? What should have come from us in a respective way to protect Judaism, it was turned against us, and the same result. We will still be separate. We think that we can assimilate. We think we could become a part of them. God says, what you plan, I laugh, as the Yiddish expression goes. You can plan what you think, but the will of God will come. And this is right in our face, all of this. Can you imagine this? They stopped socializing with the Jews. What is behind all these laws that segregate between Jews and non-Jews? To make sure that there is no socializing. To make sure that there's no partying, no meetings, no marriage, no relations. That's the idea. And we didn't follow the Torah law, so the Germans turned it around. And they were going to make sure that we followed the laws, but now it's in their dirty, filthy, blood-stained hands. They also stopped shopping in Jewish-owned stores. An amazing story. The first demonstration against Jewish businesses in Germany was held on April 1st, 1933. Do you know what day? Look at if you have a calendar, look it up. That was on the Sabbath. What the hell were they going and demonstrating against Jews on the Sabbath? The Jews don't open up their stores. Yeah, but this is Germany, baby. This is Germany, 1933. Jewish stores were open. And they put two guards, two Aryan German guards in front of every Jewish store business and made sure that no one would go into their store on this Sabbath. Amazing thing. And the religious Jews on that day, April 1st, 1933, you know what day that was? That was Sabbath, and Jews, religious, were in the synagogues. And you know what they were reading? It was called the Great Sabbath, Shabbat HaGadol. Let me tell you, Len, hold on to your socks here. Let me tell you what we read in the Haftarah, in the prophets. Here's what we read. It was on that day when they decided to boycott Jewish stores. Listen to this. Behold, I send you. We're on the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verses 23 and 24. Listen closely. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and awesome day of Hashem. And he will turn back to God the hearts of fathers with their sons, and the hearts of sons with their fathers. God is saying that when Elijah comes, we better wake up. And the fathers better get their sons, back on the right track. And the sons, if the fathers and the mothers went off the track, they better get their parents back on the right track. Why? Lest I come and strike the land with utter destruction. Now, the word destruction is a translation here. But in Hebrew, the word is cherem, which is a boycott. Do you understand what's going on here? On April 1st, 1933, the first demonstration against Jewish businesses took place on a Sabbath. They sent soldiers to make sure that no one would go into a Jewish store on Sabbath. That sounds familiar. I didn't think Jews were allowed to work on the Sabbath. That's right. But we didn't keep that law. So they put out those, and we're reading in the synagogues on that Sabbath, the great Sabbath, Shabbat HaGadol, before Passover. We're reading that if we don't get our act together, then God is going to send a boycott. Goes further. Jews were forbidden from entering theaters. Oh my God. Can you imagine that? We can't go into the theater. We can't go see Lady Gaga. This is awful. Jews were not allowed to go into their theaters. Now, do you remember in Egypt? When did the Jewish predicament in Egypt go from okay to terrible? One of the things that Jews started doing in Egypt was they started going to the theaters of the Egyptians. This was the beginning of the destruction of the Jewish community of Egypt before slavery. One of the first things that bothered them was that the Jews in Egypt were going to their theaters. So this is like a recycled. Special benches were designated for them in public parks. There were benches that said only for Jews. Jews were benched. Which is kind of funny because benched in Yiddish means blessed. But in this case, it wasn't such a great blessing for them. They had their own benches. In schools, children were taught of racial distinctions between Aryans and Jews, causing ridicule of Jewish students. Eventually, Jewish children who attended public schools were expelled and forced, get this, forced to attend Jewish schools. Oh my, this is awful. I'm forced now to go to a Jewish school. Folks, we understand what's going on. God tells the Jewish people to be separate. When they're separate, there will be a blessing to the Jewish people. This will be a blessing for the nations when the Jewish people are separate. And instead of becoming separate, we assimilate. We mingle within the nations. We start going into their politics. We start going into their governments and start social services and public offices and theaters and arts and sports, and they can't stand it anymore. So they decide to do what? To separate. God, master plan, separate in order to bring blessing on the Jewish people and the world. And we decide we are a lot smarter. And we will assimilate in order to become one and accepted. And we will be more German and more patriotic and more Christian than the Christians, more German, more patriotic than the Germans. What a boomerang. We end with an amazing Rav Naftali Tzvi of Lublin, the Emek Davar. He has not widely known, but he has a commentary on of songs one of the books of the Torah, one of the 24 books. And he has there an amazing lesson. He says, how do we explain anti-Semitism? And he writes there, black and white, an amazing line. In his introduction to the Song of Songs, he says that when the Jewish people in Egypt were in the city of Goshen, which was an only Jewish city, they prospered. Everything was fine. It is only when the Jews decided to leave the city of Goshen, the Jewish city of Goshen, and assimilate, integrate into the cities, into the Egyptian cities, that was the beginning of the end. That was the beginning of the end of the Jewish people. Once they became part of the Egyptian life, culture, politics, that was the beginning of the end. Sometimes it looks at the beginning pretty, but then eventually it's the same fall or the downfall. That's an amazing lesson to always remember. That when the Jewish people are in exile, when Jacob sends his sons to bring food from Egypt back to the land of Israel, he tells them, keep a low profile. Don't get in the kishkes, don't get in the intestines of the non-Jews. Go there, keep a low profile. We're in exile. We're not in the land of Israel. I'm sending you to Egypt. We're a minority. Keep low. Because if you rear your head high, then there will be those that will come to chop it off. Hold on. Don't touch this dial for next week. We're going to finish it off.